this workshop series. Today, I'll be your moderator. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our speakers who have joined us today and very generously prepared presentations. And thank you to all of our participants for registering and engaging with this workshop series. So I'm going to start out by just giving a little description of what our anticipated agenda is for today. So first, I'm going to give a very brief description of Starlab. Then one of my colleagues, Dr. Josh Hagen from the Human Performance Collaborative, is going to tell us a little bit about HPC and the work that they do here at The Ohio State University. Following that, we will have presentations from Dr. Rachel Passmore from NASA, Dr. Suzanne Bell from NASA, Dr. Dora Denoviel from Trish and Baylor College, and then Dr. Jacob Hyde from Warfighter Consulting. Once all of the presentations have concluded, we will have a full panel of all of our panelists with the opportunity for anyone in the workshop to ask questions. So there are two different ways that you can ask questions. You can either unmute yourself and ask your question over Zoom to our panelists. If you would like to do that, please just raise your Zoom hand and I will go ahead and call on you, basically, just to make sure that things stay organized. The second way that you can ask questions during the Q&A is you can put your question in the chat. And if you do that, I will ask it on behalf of you to our panelists. So please do be thinking of questions while our panelists are presenting. And then without any further ado, I'm gonna just, we'll go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, Starlab is a commercial space station that is being built as part of a partnership between countries and companies from all around the world. It is led in the United States by Voyager Technologies and includes partners from Europe, which is Airbus Space and Defense, as well as Japan with Mitsubishi Corporation, Canada with MDA Space, and a couple others. And the intention behind Starlab is to build a next generation space station that is a commercial platform for research and science in low Earth orbit. It is supported under the NASA Phase 1 Commercial Low Earth Orbit's Destination Program. And is set to launch in 2029 with the full capability to support the same level of research with updated facilities that is currently going on ISS. So that's the International Space Station. If you have any more questions about Starlab or would like to learn more about how you can become involved as either an academic researcher or an industry participant, please feel free to reach out to me. I will make sure to put my email in the chat, and I would be happy to answer questions or discuss further what it is that we're doing at Starlab and how you can be involved with the research and work that we are doing. So I will go ahead and hand things off to Dr. Josh Hagen from the Human Performance Collaborative to talk a little bit about the work that HPC is doing.
All right, awesome. So welcome everybody. Really appreciate you joining today on one of our seminars for Starlab in Space and Human Performance Collaborative. We've done a number of these. They've been super exciting. So we've got a lot of people online, so we're excited about that. A little bit about the HPC at the Ohio State University is we're an initiative that's been at it for about 5 years. And really our mission is to create really, really great multidisciplinary research teams to optimize human performance on Earth and above as well. So excited to partner with Starlab and all the great research that's going on here. We're going to hear some awesome talks today. It's going to talk about a lot regarding performance in space and use us as a resource to, anything that involves the human or how they perform is really what we're interested in. So we've got all sorts of backgrounds from engineers to neuroscientists to psychologists to sports scientists to physiologists, really anything that just pertains to the human being and anything we do to optimize. And traditionally our work has been in what we call like high stress, high allostatic load populations for people like first responders, military, athletes, but really, stress is stress. And obviously there's some pretty significant environmental stressors that are going to be on astronauts and even anybody supporting them as well. So we like to think broadly of, there might be a handful of astronauts, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of people supporting them on a minute to minute basis. So thinking about ways that we can optimize every single one of them. That's really what we're all about. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. Definitely think of questions, participate in the end of the round table, and it'll be a great discussion. So thanks a lot. I'll pass it back over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate that. So we will jump in with our first speaker. So today we are going to hear from Dr. Rachel Passmore, operational psychologist at NASA. Dr. Passmore, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everybody. Hold on one second. I attempted during our little practice here, so let's see if I can get this set up.
Yes, everyone, thank you for bearing with us while we do the transitions in between speakers. It's one of the incredible things of doing these sessions virtually is that we can have people join us from all around the world, but it also means that we need a little bit of extra time to manage the technical switching with multiple speakers. So thank you.
Awesome. Abby, can you confirm that I'm in the presenter mode?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rachel Passmore. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but operational psychologist by role. I work in the Behavioral Health and Performance Operations Group at NASA. It's a great pleasure to present some of the work our team does that provides support for the behavioral health of astronauts and optimizing their performance. So BHP Ops is a part of our Space Medicine Operations Division at Johnson Space Center. So within our team, we have 5 operational psychologists, a psychiatrist, an applied psych, an industrial organizational psychologist, and behavioral health specialists. So we're really here to provide comprehensive services to astronauts throughout their career. Our mission is to optimize their behavioral health, well-being, and their performance so that they are well prepared for spaceflight by way of individualized support services for crew members, their families during all phases of flight. So ultimately, we want them to have a safe, very meaningful, and enjoyable career. So here's a sampler of the services that I'll cover today, a little bit more in depth. But basically, we start our work at beginning at astronaut selection during their astronaut candidate training period. We provide behavioral health evaluations, pre, in-flight, and post-flight, cognitive assessments, in-flight psychological support for them and their families, and elective services related to performance, such as consultation and coaching. So the spaceflight environment does come with so many different hazards that we're really still trying to understand, from physical hazards like CO2 elevations, radiation, toxins, to the psychological hazards like isolation, confinement, fatigue, and there's a synergistic effect on how these hazards impact astronauts. So our job is to prevent and mitigate these risks by first selecting the right people, so screening out individuals that are the most vulnerable and selecting in applicants that demonstrate their capability to be adaptable and resilient. Training astronauts on skills to increase their capabilities above the demands of the environment of spaceflight, and supporting crew members by monitoring their behavioral and cognitive health, providing consultation, information, make recommendations for rest recovery cycles, medication, and importing sustaining conditions. So ideally to help make an abnormal environment be as normal as possible, if one can. So BHP operations completed multiple job analyses to determine the key competencies that make astronauts successful in short duration and long duration missions. So essentially, they're adaptable, they can get along well with others in a small group setting. Do they work well on a team? Do they have good decision making under stress, especially for extended periods of time? So the most important countermeasure for us is selection. It's composed of 2 complementary but different processes. There's a psychiatric qualification that's based on NASA medical standards that includes a recommendation to the Aerospace Medical Board, followed by a psychological suitability assessment for varied space missions. The suitability rating of the applicant by the operational psychologist is presented to the astronaut selection board. It is used as advisory information, so we do not make selection decisions. So the information we provide is related to the applicant's relative strengths and weaknesses in expeditionary competencies that I mentioned before. We have a multi-method approach, so psychological testing, they go through team events, individual events, and structured interviews. There are multiple raters that observe each applicant, so the trends in the data streams are then used to formulate suitability rating that the operational psychologist presents to the suitability board. We are heavily involved in training. It is another critical countermeasure that targets the non-technical skills that are necessary for living and working with others in ice environments for extended periods of time. We provide training in their astronaut candidacy period, as well as during their in-flight period, once they get assigned to flight. So during the astronaut candidate training, so also known as ASCAN training, the topics pretty much center around what the astronaut office calls expeditionary skills. So those are self-care, care, teamwork, small group living, communication, leadership, followership. There's a mix of didactic training and experiential training. We also have direct observation of their performance during team exercises, during their EVA qualification training pipeline, and expeditionary skills trips. And they are provided feedback in real time by operational psychologists, as well as other folks on our team. Uh-oh. Okay. Oh. Sorry, everybody. Okay. All right, so we also provide, oh my gosh, we also, during the ASCAN training period, we meet with them every 2 months to consult with them on competency development, review their assessment and selection, psychological testing data, and performance data, and develop goals together. So they also receive training on performance psychology topics similar to sports teams, in tandem with the strength and conditioning coaches that we have here at NASA, as well as we provide personal and professional consultation. So things they might talk about are the adjustment to NASA, maybe specific goals related to their competency development as well. Pre-flight training includes didactic training on the psychological factors of spaceflight. So we cover a lot of lessons learned that we get from the different interviews at different points of time, and then mitigation strategies as well. So during the mission, we do provide behavioral health medicine, so in-mission support, as well as pre-flight and post-flight evaluation. So this is more of a medical-related requirement that we have here. We also provide periodic in-flight cognitive assessments. We offer in-flight psychology support services that helps normalize the environment. So think of it like those services are like their own entertainment and welfare concierge services. So more on that a little bit later. So when an astronaut gets assigned, they will work with 5 personnel from our group. Yep, there are 5 of us that work with 1 astronaut. We have 2 BHP ops providers, it's either 2 operational psychologists or an operational psychologist and a psychiatrist. There's a psychologist separately for our cognitive assessment, which is called the WINSCAT. So if any military people in here, the ANOM is what it's modeled after. And they also have 2 psych support coordinators. It's a prime and a backup. All right, so they have several pre-flight assessments that are conducted by the ops psychs or the psychiatrist. They are medical appointments which go into their electronic medical record. We're interested in their perceptions of their readiness and their family's readiness for the mission, what their workload and fatigue level is, how things are going for their crew and any concerns there, any issues that they're having with NASA management, their overall mood, what's their goal for their mission. So I want to mention that they do get a yearly psychological evaluation when they are not in assigned status. So we have multiple touch points with them when they are in the pre-flight assessment pipeline or pre-flight pipeline, but they do get a yearly evaluation in our flight medicine clinic. So while they're in flight, they do get a private psychological conference. So this was something that was originated by the Russians as a countermeasure, and we at NASA started implementing it in 1995. It's private, happens every 2 weeks on Microsoft Teams. It used to be in mission control, but technology has evolved, and so we can essentially talk to them from anywhere. Usually they last 15 to 20 minutes, and so we're interested in things like how they perceive their mission is going, how long they're getting along with their crew members, are they overworked or underworked, any family concerns, and are there any issues or actually good things going on with the ground. And just a quick bullet point about our in-flight cognitive assessment. We do give this every 30 days to them. And it's just a way for us to have an objective clinical feedback tool for the astronauts and to the crew surgeons if there's some sort of need for it after an event. All right, so here's a little bit of a sampler of some of the events that have occurred over the last 46 years in spaceflight. Sometimes there are deaths of family members or friends. Crew friction can happen. More typically, there's high periods of workload that can create exhaustion. It's more recent events, like a delayed return to Earth with Sunny and Butch recently. Could be some conflict with Browns, cultural misunderstandings. There's 9/11 that happened, a pandemic. But generally, we find out that astronauts tend to experience a lot of personal fulfillment while they're there, and they really do enjoy their experience. So it's really cool as a psychologist to listen to them live their dream and just kind of be a witness to that. It's just a really cool thing. So additional countermeasures include our in-flight support services. So I'll cover these separately, and I know I need to kind of move through. So one of the countermeasures is the use of the IP phone. So it's we have 12 units on station. This is when they can call their families or friends or anybody that they wanted that's non-scheduled. So it's kind of like just regular having a cell phone at home where you can call anybody. But the key is that nobody can call in, which is probably a good thing, not getting interrupted during the day. They also have hard scheduled private family conferences once a week. As the technology has evolved as well, they are able to call down and do video calls whenever they want separately. But in the past, they had to be scheduled because there's the band or compasses had to be scheduled. But they, like I said, they're private and they can video call them whenever they like. One of the highest value, high yield countermeasures that crew members like is the crew care packages. And so the amount of items that they get periodically, like every 2 months, maybe 3 months, they are delivered cargo, and they get about the size of a shoebox of items. There's a list of items that they cannot actually fly on the ISS, things related to glitter or little bits and pieces of nuts and things like that. So there's a list of items that they can't fly, but these are personal items that or cards from family members and things like that. So definitely something that they do feel are a huge morale booster while they're on station. They do have something called private special conferences. So this is something that, again, it's not public. It's something where we coordinate for them on the ground. So that this may be a conference with one of their kids' Boy Scout troops or something like that, or a meeting with their alumni association, or maybe a recreational group that they have. So this is something that our team helps coordinate for them. And they do get one of these once a month. And then they have crew discretionary events, so they do get two per mission. We do have a team of people that have connections with different movie studios and publishers and publishing houses and stuff like that. So they coordinate time where they can chat with an author or sport or athlete or an actor. They also have their own crew webpage. So the team uploads music, TV, whatever you name it, books, podcasts, daily news, and things like that. So they get a chance to get all of their things there. The team also will upload maybe videos that family and friends send in to us to put on their crew page too. They do have a movie and TV library, keyboard, guitars, and then a projector to watch movies. And then kind of the last slide here. So when they return, we do provide a series of post-flight assessments, reintegration support for them and their families. So it's a good opportunity for us to help bring closure to their mission, as well as collect lessons learned for future flyers. So actually that concludes my presentation. I don't know if I went over time, but that's all I have for now.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Passmore. And that was really interesting. So the way that this works is that if there's any extra time left in a speaker's slot within the agenda, we will offer the option for participants to ask directed questions based on your presentation. But if there aren't any questions, we'll move along. And that just means that we'll have more time at the end for the panel discussion. So you were very efficient, and we have about 5 or so extra minutes. So if anyone has a question specifically for Dr. Passmore, feel free to either raise your Zoom hand and we'll ask you to unmute and ask it, or to drop it in the chat. All right, I do see a question from Dr. Anna Tismillo. Would you like to unmute, please?
Hello. Hello, and thank you for this wonderful presentation and all the insights that, some of us were unaware. I have a couple of questions which are related. First of all, is there really Wi-Fi on ISS? Because from what I gather, I was at the conference at TSA last week, and they have one VR headset that cannot be connected because there's no Wi-Fi. So they have preloaded content, making things very challenging there if you want to support astronauts in terms of their mental health state. And the other thing is, I can understand all these tools, and NASA has a very comprehensive list of assessment pre, during, and post-flight, but all these contain human in the loop. Since we are heading towards missions to the moon or to Mars, where human communication, with the mission control or Earth won't be possible. Do you reckon that immersive technologies like AI, for example, could play a role in this? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your question. So they do have internet, so they can, sometimes they're not able to access it because of the compasses, but they can get real-time internet just like we do. For in low Earth orbit will be very different, as you mentioned, as we kind of move a little forward. I'm going to save your last question for Dr. Bell, because she's on the research side. She and her team are exploring all those sorts of new countermeasures that we could use with comm delays, the leveraging AI if we can, virtual reality. So I feel like she will have some things to talk about, like what they're researching there in the analog space. So I'm sorry, but I do feel like it is such a new, new new approach to how we take care of the psychological health of astronauts? Absolutely. So I'm really curious about where the new generation and technology takes us. I think we're really open to like what it could look like.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll revisit that question during the Q&A at the end for sure. Next up, we're going to take one more question before we move on to our next speaker. So Jasmeet Hayes.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the assessment battery that's used at selection as well as during. For example, what kind of personality testing are you doing? Are these all standardized measures? And then I was also wondering how you might deal with repeat cognitive testing, people doing better over time, especially if you're doing it pretty frequently. Do you think that they're reliable even though you're giving those measures over time many times?
Yes. Okay. So first question, I can't provide the actual assessments that we use as they're trade secrets for us. But I feel like there's plenty of things on Reddit and published that if you did some searching, you probably can you could find it. So I'm so sorry I can't share that with you. But I'm sure you could take a wild guess. Like we do use psychopathology measures, normal personality measures, and cognitive assessments that are well validated tools for assessment selection programming. And then the in-flight cognitive testing. So they do take like there are like the practice effects, yes, like there are. So they do like perform really, really well. They do get 6 baseline testing on Earth before they go. So there is like some relative changes while they're in flight. If there is like some differences, that it does flag as significant change. But they are like really high functioning people who like want to beat the test. So they like typically just do really, really well and just like hit the ceiling. You're welcome.
Amazing. That was such a great question and response. Thank you, Dr. Passmore. I'm going to use my moderator privilege for a moment to ask a question as well, which is knowing that most crews are comprised of international crew members, not just American or United States astronauts. Can you talk a little bit about how does your team support international crew members in their psychological and behavioral health, or is that something that's conducted by the space agency of origin for the astronaut, and how do you work with their teams if that's the case?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. So yes, they do. Each space agency has their own team of psychologists or behavioral health team that works with the international partner astronauts. We as a group meet every year to talk about like trends or things that we could do better with working together, like as the psychologists of the international team. So we do have that. So when the IPs are here, we don't really have a whole lot of engagement with them. Sometimes we do, but not really. We always reinforce or try to encourage them to spend any time that they can off time to build connections and relationships with them, because it's really surprising how limited time right now that the crew members actually spend training together as a team. Like you think that they would just spend a whole lot of time, but it's just related to travel. It's related to just like where they are and their training flows and the resources available at NASA. That there isn't a whole lot of actual time that they spend together as a team. Like even a crew as like Americans, not let alone like their international like crewmates. So like with the Soyuz and ISS or Dragon flyers. So it's just really interesting area, like moving forward for Artemis missions. Like we would really want to make sure that we can do more crew-based training than we have for ISS.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Nope, totally makes sense that with their pretty significant training requirements prior to flight, that they're not always in the same place at the same time. If anyone is interested in hearing more about what that training period looks like before an ISS flight, there's a really great podcast by, I believe it's called Houston We Have a Podcast, where they have an entire hour-long conversation with one of the schedulers who helps to make sure that the astronauts are in the right place at the right time during that training period. So that's definitely a great listen. Dr. Passmore, thank you so much for your presentation and for being so generous with your time joining us today. Next up, we will have Dr. Suzanne Bell, also from NASA, who will be giving us another presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screens, or here we go, my slides. And I love all the questions. You are hitting on exactly what we do in the lab down at NASA Johnson Space Center. So I'm Suzanne Bell. I lead the Behavioral Health and Performance Lab. It's a team of about 15 scientists at the master's and PhD level, and we really work on problem solving the future of spaceflight and enabling and creating the tools that Dr. Passmore and others can use to support the astronauts of the future. So that's what I'll be talking with you about today. So by now, you've probably become acquainted with the stressors astronauts have exposure to in space, either through different readings or even what Dr. Passmore just said. But there's quite a few environmental stressors. We call these the 5 hazards of spaceflight. Some you might expect, like radiation, but there are also several psychological challenges, such as sensory deprivation, confinement, isolation, lack of privacy, and periods of high or low workload. Both the environmental and physiological stressors can take a significant toll both on the human body, but also prove to be psychologically stressful to the astronaut. I'm so glad to go after Dr. Passmore today. Usually I would talk a little bit more about this slide, but she did such a great job talking about current operations in the International Space Station. But summary statement is there's several things available to them. Rachel and the team she works in does a great job of supporting the astronauts. And astronauts generally thrive and do really well on the International Space Station. In fact, for most of the things we're interested in with behavioral health and teaming, we consider it very well mitigated and that they do thrive in that environment. But as we push the envelope, as we push the frontiers of spaceflight, we're having longer missions, smaller cabins, all sorts of additional exposure to radiation. And so that's where what I do and my team comes into play. So this is a quote from Scott Kelly. He was aboard the International Space Station for 340 consecutive days. At the time, it was a record for the most time spent in space by a US citizen. And then 9 days after his mission ended, he announced his retirement. And this is what he said in a news release when he was releasing his book. Every day I was exposed to 10 times the radiation of a person on Earth, which will increase my risk of fatal cancer for the rest of my life. Not to mention the psychological stress, which is harder to quantify and perhaps just as damaging. So if you're talking about long durations in space, long-term in isolation and confinement, or particularly as we think to our future missions, the challenges increase tenfold, 100-fold, 150-fold to really challenge the frontiers of human performance. So what we focus on is what we're doing for the Artemis missions, as well as planning for future Mars missions. If you saw any of the news that came out this week, there's a big to-do about Ignite and the idea that for Artemis missions, what we're doing. I hope you all tune in for a potential launch next Wednesday at 6:24 is the first time the launch period will open in April. And this is the start of the Artemis generation and the time when we will send humans to Mars, this time beyond low Earth orbit for the first time since the Apollo missions. It looks totally different than the international. I'm excited too. Thank you, Henry. It looks totally different than what life looks like in the International Space Station. The International Space Station is equivalent to about a 6-bedroom apartment. They have their own sleeping spaces, communal areas to eat. Orion is something like a camper van. And so 4 astronauts will sleep in this tiny space, work in this tiny space, have to live together as a group, prepare their food, exercise in the middle of this space while others are on the sides of the space. For sleeping, they won't have their own sleeping quarters. Now they're going to have like it was similar to like a hammock that is across the shared space. Completely different setup, but living and working in small spaces will be challenged. they'll have much higher workloads and multiple missions that have multiple EVAs. So what we're planning for the Artemis missions is not just putting our footprints and the flag back on the moon, but to have a sustained presence on the moon. And so that requires a lot more spacewalks or extravehicular activities. And so in those, right now, when we do a spacewalk outside the International Space Station, there's a lot of time leading up to it, time to prepare. They'll do usually one spacewalk and then have quite a recovery time afterwards. They can have broken fingernails or injured shoulders, and it can be psychologically taxing and tiring. For Artemis missions with a sustained presence, we're looking at things like every other day for 6 hours a day. So this is an unprecedented number of EVAs as well as the length of EVAs. We'll have close support from mission control. There are estimates that particularly as we are near the moon, that there will be a communication delay of 5 to 10 seconds because of encryption and the other way the communication happens. And so what is the frustration of that on both their communication with family and friends, as well as their ability to problem solve with mission control? Add in the complexity that someone on a space vehicle near the moon might be supporting an extravehicular activity on the moon for these spacewalks. And at the same time, they'll have real-time communication, but then mission control is on that 5 to 10 second delay. So imagine managing both at the same time. These are the types of problems and challenges we look at and try to provide solutions for them. Of course, we want to build a sustained presence on the moon, but ultimately we want to go to Mars and land the first humans on Mars. That's going to be another set of challenges as we look at something like 40-minute communication delays, 2.5-year missions, prolonged isolation and confinement, resource restrictions such as highly restricted water, pre-positioned food where there's no astronaut preference or choice, among other challenges. So what we do in the lab is risk characterization and reduction research and technology development focused on the Artemis missions as well as a journey to Mars. All of our research fits within that one way or the other. And what we do is we try to characterize or understand how things like the hazards of spaceflight might affect behavioral health, wellness, interpersonal relationships, teaming both within the crew and with mission control. And then we also spend a lot of time in the sleep and human systems integration architecture or human factors risks, although there are separate labs for that, so we're often partnering with them. But we both not only try to figure out what's happening and where the risks and sticking points are, but then provide solutions. Everything we do at NASA is applied research. We don't do any basic research. So I can't just bring problems, I got to bring a solution. So we do a lot of technology development, and whether it's VR or communication platforms, and we're also doing a lot of other intervention work right now since the risks are now starting to be well characterized. So happy to be right after Dr. Passmore. What we do should all be operationally relevant. So we partner closely with operations as much as possible and try to feed them what they need to do their job. They use evidence-based practices to support current astronauts, teams, and their family. And then we work closely both to get their inputs on what might work, as well as provide the evidence bases and then conduct the research and develop the countermeasures needed for the future. Dr. Passmore's talked a lot about what they do. But as I mentioned, we don't want to know just to learn. We want to provide solutions. And so the way we always think about it in the lab is what are the points of leverage which we can affect that can provide countermeasures or solutions to risks related to behavioral health and teaming. We can think about how we can better select astronauts or what they might look like for these new mission profiles. We can think about ways that we can train them differently or in addition, or even keep the same training that they have now. We can think about team composition, particularly as you live and work in these small spaces together for an extended period of time. As Dr. Passmore mentioned, they don't get a lot of team training. So what can we do to maximize those moments that they do have team training, and what can we prioritize there? And then also teaching them to self-correct while they're in mission. We look at novel ways to develop friendly and family and friend support, as well as assist with reintegration. Right now, that's mostly done by the Employee Assistance Program, but as we move to the future in these 2.5-year missions, they're going to look a little bit different and have more concerted reintegration, like you would see with the military. We affect the design and the vehicle concepts of operations. And we also create monitoring tools and then develop countermeasures. How do we do all this? Since we haven't gone to the moon or Mars, we conduct research in what we call space and space analog environments. We do have multiple studies in the International Space Station. That's a great place to learn about things like how people operate in microgravity. At the same time, that's not always a good analog for us. Sometimes it's way too big. And so we also have isolation analogs that we conduct research in. There's one on the upper right there that's called the Human Exploration Research Analog. And on the bottom, that's JPIA, which is our 378-day Mars resource restricted environment that we currently have a crew of 4 in. They're at about the 160-day mark, I think, maybe 175 days. And then up at the top is the Natural Buoyancy Lab, where we do a lot of spacewalk research right now. As we prepare for the Artemis missions. Someone asked about standard measures. Dr. Passmore can't tell you the secrets of selection, but what I can tell you is that we do collect a standard suite of measures in our isolation analogs. One of the reasons we do that is because it's always small sample. Think of JPIA that I just told you. It's going to take, you have mission ramp up, pre-mission, 378-day mission. Then you have 2 weeks post-mission. Then you have post-mission follow-up, including just the maintenance of the habitat. It's 1.5 years just to run one crew of 4. Very limited sample sizes in everything we do when we push the limits. So we collect a standard suite of measures so we can not only answer the aims of the particular study, but then we can also look across and learn things from multiple settings, multiple analogs. We also collect a subset of this in the International Space Station, so we can compare it to what we're seeing from the astronauts, even though in our analogs, they are selected to be astronaut-like. And so what are the measures we give as part of the standard suite? We give physiological and biomarkers of sleep and heart rate. We give individual behavioral health, personality assessments, an assessment of social desirability, assessments of depression, mood and affect, stress, and neurobehavioral functioning. We collect data on objective performance, including cognitive performance and robot, which is an operationally relevant task that mimics the way they operate the Canadarm2 on the International Space Station. It has a strong sensory motor, cognitive, and other skills needed to operate that effectively. And then we also have team and social dynamics measures about team performance, team cohesion, team processes, psych safety, social support, and group living. This is our standard suite, and then it ebbs and flows depending on the research question. So for example, we have team problem solving tasks that we can deploy. We have a different version of this for our standard measures in EVA research because we have so many EVA research studies now. So it's a little different than this and involves a little closer look at things like state anxiety and as well as self-efficacy or belief in self would be the types of additions we would see for EVA. So good news is we've been working hard on this research now for a number of years. In the lab, one of the things I'm really happy about with the lab is we have used digital transformation principles and have automated much of this where possible. And what we have is a standard suite with a database that now has 117 individuals in isolation from between 45 days and past 1 year. 80 of these individuals are in isolation, in analog isolations, and 37 are astronauts in space. So it gives us a really beautiful database. It also has a team sample size of, what does that say? 37, right? Okay, there we go. It's too small for my glasses because we actually have a few more teams now because I didn't include JPIA in here, which has been processed. But okay, so anyway, it's a beautiful data set. And what we can do is quickly understand and characterize what are the different risks, where do we see sticking points, where do we not. Someone asked in the chat about events. We can look across different events. Is it when there's emergency events that we see changes in performance? Is it long-term isolation that we see changes in depression? We have an investigators workshop coming up that's sponsored by the Human Research Program in 2 weeks. It's free to register. And there I'll be presenting 5 things that aren't published that you need to know from this database, particularly for those of you who will be working in this space. There are some things you shouldn't worry about anymore, and perhaps other things you should. So it's a little teaser to tune in later. But the cool thing is, what we can do is produce, we can produce figures near instantly from this database. We can run analyses very quickly. We can look at how things compare across different settings or situations or across mission day. We've also published a couple things from this database that you'll see to start emerge. For example, there was a question about change in cognitive performance over time, that wasn't exactly the question. But we have a multiple peer-reviewed journal publications from this. And one example is data from 25 astronauts on 6-month missions to the International Space Station. We looked at their cognitive performance, and we saw it's actually good news for all these platforms like Starlab going into a low Earth orbit, that cognitive performance was generally stable over time, with some differences observed, particularly as they transitioned across mission phases for specific subtests, but very little, if no, enduring or long-term effects. The small transition effects we saw were slowed performance observed early in flight on processing speed, visual working memory, and sustained attention. This can be used to help understand scheduling, so where you might want to schedule or push, where you might have to give people a little bit more time to transition. And then there was a decrease in risk-taking propensity during late flight and post-mission phases. Among other things, this database that we have now can be used to look at things as I've presented here. Other publications have looked at social support and show how a crew can be a buffer to stress if you are able to maintain social support, even when that social support declines with their family in long-term isolation. And then we published a group living skills. But the great thing about that database is my lab leads the Artemis II crew health and readiness research. It's a project called Archer. And what we're trying to do as the astronauts launch, we've collected all our pre-mission data at this point and are just proceeding with the rest of the mission now. But the overarching research goal is to use Artemis II data to further define the likelihood and consequences of behavioral health team. This protocol also includes the human factors and sleep risks as we move beyond low Earth orbit, and to create a research infrastructure that can be expanded to include future Artemis missions. Okay, when this proposal first came to me, I was like, oh, okay, so I will have a sample size of 4. That's everybody, right? So how are you going to do anything? How are you going to make any statements? The good news is we have that beautiful database. So everything we're doing is a Bayesian framework, where we're using that as our best guess, what we've learned from low Earth orbit. And then we will refine our understanding and update our understanding of the situation by adding in that Artemis II data and using a Bayesian framework. Then when Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 launches, we can continue to update it to understand our risks and better characterize what's life like beyond low Earth orbit. A nice thing about Artemis 2 research too, it's really pushing the envelope also with the size of the cabin. Quite small, pressures on group living, sleep, although very well mitigated in the International Space Station, and astronauts do get sufficient sleep in space. Now you're talking about the hammocks and the incredible tempo of the work, particularly in the first couple of days. You might be woken by the, loud noises from the vehicle. It's just very unknown at this point. This is critical data for us as we start to push the envelope in the Artemis missions. This is a 10-day test. Later missions will be longer, and then really shoot for that sustained presence on the Earth. We already have a sustained presence on the Earth, kind of. No, we do. But then as we move to the moon. About 1/3 of the research that we do right now in the lab is focused on those EVAs that we'll be doing for the sustained presence on the moon. These are challenging for the reasons I talked about, but also challenging from a measurement perspective. So when I talked about cognitive performance in the International Space Station, they fill out something called cognition, which is a computer device where they respond to it, very similar to the WinSCAT that Dr. Passmore was talking about, given on the ANAM and the military platform. But for when you're in that spacesuit, I mean, how is that person in the spacesuit right there going to complete a test where they're, moving a mouse or doing a touchpad. It's not going to happen. So we've created unobtrusive embedded measures of both performance and cognitive function, and used lexical and vocal indicators of how they interact with each other to be able to look at things like state anxiety. That way we can be as unobtrusive as possible, and then look for opportunities to improve their scheduling as well as their environment, so that we can maximize what they might do. Let me give you an example of how we might maximize their scheduling. So we look at things like cognitive fatigue, cognitive workload. If a traverse, which we now know is very high in cognitive workload, or we think will be with the future-oriented cognitive task analysis, and we have them mimic a traverse in one of our analog, EVA analog environments. And then when they're done with that traverse, we can look at their performance on certain geology and other science tasks. If they start making errors on safety, making errors on those tasks with word choice and other things, we can think about where that might be differently in the protocol. Was that traverse too long? Do we need to put high cognitive workload stuff earlier? And so we can play with those schedules with the information we gain from these really important studies. They're really complicated studies, but I personally enjoy them. They're very hard, which makes it interesting to me. Okay, as I mentioned, we always want to provide a countermeasure, a solution. I just talked about scheduling with the EVAs there, but we also want to equip Dr. Passmore and others with the ability to support the crew. And then as we move to things like Mission to Mars, a lot of it's just going to be a lot more autonomous, with situational awareness from the provider, or long communication and delayed communication with family and friends. But it's going to look a lot different than it is now. We have 27 projects in the lab and technology developments. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm just going to point out a couple of the types of things and how they feed into this overall. One is we can develop novel assessments for selection and for understanding how teams work in dynamic situations, as well as how might they work in the challenges that you might expect for Artemis and Mars missions. Another type of thing we're working on is a study where we're building predictive models of team composition for long duration space exploration. I was a long-time professor before I went to NASA full-time. This was actually one of my grants with my collaborators when I was a professor, and that's how I fell in love with the NASA work. We're actually done with those models now, and our last project was to create a dashboard for schedulers to use, and then our agent-based models run in the background of these dashboards. Another example is not only the EVA research I was talking about, but we have a stream that is pushing it to be fairly autonomous. EVAs are very difficult and have real-time support from mission control right now. That won't happen for Mars. And so we have an entire stream of research that looks at autonomous EVA from just a local support. We also have artificial intelligence for looking at early warning indicators that a team might be off track. This can be used for monitoring. So it uses multimodal indicators, including heart rate, verbal and lexical indicators, as well as self-report to predict performance over time. And we can see early degradations using those multimodal methods, examining crews in isolation. Right now in our CHIPIA, we do and have created friends and family support training that's given in partnership with OPS. And we're looking to see if setting those expectations and helping people deal with that long comm delay can be done in this way, or if there's still areas in need of improvement after we have deployed this training that we're evaluating. Another example is the monitoring and countermeasures for Mars that we're collecting in CHIPIA that looks at how we can apply AI to private psychological conferences and use that for monitoring, and then understanding when either a countermeasure can be self-deployed or prompts be given to a provider who are on extreme comm delay. And then one of our big projects that is really a focus right now of the lab, and that we saw when we were developing CHIPIA in the first mission, was that there isn't a sufficient platform with how crew can talk back to mission control, family and friends and providers. And so we pitched building the thing. So we have a technology development that's building a comm platform that will go along what's being developed in engineering. And we're in a year-long time when we're looking at what we're going to do and scoping it, as well as looking to see what the Department of War and others have done in this space to support autonomous crews on extreme comm delay. And then we can build, along with engineering, what are the requirements and desirements for these platforms, so we don't forget about the human component. There's probably a diverse audience here, some students, some others, but I just wanted to talk as my last slide, just some technology innovations and challenges that maybe gets you thinking about ways you can contribute in the space. There's a lot of challenges to solve when we're talking about these future missions, and I love it when people are excited and working on things. But these are kind of like true problems that I would love help in solving. One is that we tend to have very big data. We have very dense data, but it's always from a small number of subjects. So as mentioned in the lab, we do very efficient and standardized data measures and data processing. For example, we automatically generate increments report now in the International Space Station because they're very standard what we do. But innovations along Bayesian and longitudinal applications in measurement approaches, as well as computational modeling, AI in this space, AI is not great in small sample sizes. And so problem solving around these areas would be very helpful to NASA if you like it. Less obtrusive and automated data collection, particularly as we move to autonomous missions. So audiovisual data, wearable devices, embedded metrics, and then machine learning and AI applications to those measures. A lot of stuff looks really good on the initial PowerPoint slide, and then there's not much under that first slide. So we're working on the actual underlying problems and would love some help on this space from those of you who love a challenge. And then remote autonomous monitoring and countermeasures. So when are the thresholds? When does something need to be deployed? When is something actually related to operational performance or not? Those are some of the analyses that we're trying to do right now, but problem solving in that space. I've just added a couple things. We got several open access things here. The first three are from that harmonized database. The next two are related to our EVA research. We've got about 5 or 6 more things under review. And I just posted something on LinkedIn that came out yesterday with family and friends in that com delay, if those of you who see that. Then a couple podcasts where we've talked about our research that you might be interested in, and you're always welcome to ask questions. I'm fairly busy across all our projects, and luckily I get to go to launch next week, so that week is very busy for me. But please reach out. You're welcome to. I just might be a little slow in responding sometime, but that's all I have. I took most of my time. Sorry, I wanted to tell you lots of stuff, but we can talk during the panel, or we might have time for a question now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Bell. That was fantastic. And I think that we might have to ask you to come back at some point and give an entire hour-long presentation, because that was very interesting. And I know we have a ton of questions in the chat specifically for you. We do have to move on to our next speaker. We don't have time for directed questions, but we will revisit those questions during our larger Q&A. So thank you so much. Appreciate your presentation. Next up, we have Dr. Dorit Danoviel from the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. Dr. Danoviel, would you like to share your screen? And we will start your presentation.
Okay.
Everyone, just bear with us for a moment while we do the tech transfer between.
Are we seeing my slides?
We are, yep. So we do need to put them into presenter mode, though.
Into presenter mode. Let's see. No?
I believe. Okay, and then if you go to display settings at the top and click on that.
There we go. Does that
Beautiful.
work?
Yes, it looks perfect. Thank you.
And am I looking at the right screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, awesome.
You're good to go.
I have multiple screens here, so it's always like, okay, so thank you. So Suzanne, Rachel, you guys did a fabulous job. And Suzanne, I'm so glad that you laid such a thorough background on behavioral health and team performance in space. So I just wanted to take just a few minutes, and I think I'll get us back on track with the timing, to explain who we are and how we work with NASA and what our job is. So essentially, I lead TRISH, which is the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. It's a consortium of Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston that's partnered with the Human Research Program and is funded by the Human Research Program. And we also have consortium institutions, Caltech and MIT, so we cover all the coasts essentially. And our job is to kind of do things that are not traditional, if you will, that we complement the work that NASA is doing across the board. Our mission really is to cover things that are beyond just the standard research, in that we are mandated to take more risks. So we cover a lot of different areas between physiological changes, radiation mitigation, medical capabilities, human factors, as well as behavioral health. And so I'm going to focus today on just a few things to tell you about how we're doing work to help NASA prepare for the future. So, okay. I'm presuming you see my next slide. I will continue unless I hear otherwise. So we are actually now set up to serve the new space economy. And what's so interesting, especially with recent updates from the president and our new NASA administrator, is that the new space economy, whether it be in low Earth orbit or on the surface of the moon, is no longer going to be driven just by governmental space agencies. NASA is a tremendous organization, has really been the leader, and has its budget's been much, much bigger than most other nations' budgets in terms of spending in space and the types of capabilities that it's developed. And as you heard from Suzanne, we have a real robust understanding of how to take care of humans in low Earth orbit. But as we're seeing the landscape now, especially with organizations like Starlab and others, that composition of who's going to be in space, what are the players, and the composition of the astronauts is going to be very different. And so we have to think about that on behalf of the government. We have to think about how we position NASA to be most effective in that new type of economy. And as I said before, we're complementing NASA's efforts. So you just heard a tremendous amount of research that's being done by the Human Research Program under Suzanne's leadership. And our job is to sort of look for areas where we could take bigger risks and to create the giant leaps. And oftentimes those may not work. So what you see here, I'm going to start by moving far out to the surface of Mars. This is an image that was taken off of one of the landers on Mars, and you could see the complete desolation of this type of environment. And in fact, that little dot, that little bright dot, is Earth, and that's how far away Earth is. Everybody that you've ever loved, everybody that you cared about, is, if you're standing there on the surface of Mars, that is the how far away all those people are. And so to think about that, it's really a monumental task to consider how we take care of people when they are eventually going to go to that long duration 2.5-year mission, pre-populating the foods on Mars, et cetera, for that crew. That's an eventual goal. I mean, right now we're focused on low Earth orbit, we're focused on going back to the moon, but it's always with the intention of crawl, walk, run, if you will. And the running part of it is always in the back of our minds, is how do we prepare ourselves for that long duration, far away mission to Mars? And so we could talk about the many things that we need to do to prepare us to go to this kind of mission. But actually, I was contacted to speak to you today based on a paper that I put out with some colleagues about nourishing the brain in space. And so this caught the attention of the organizers of this meeting. And I just wanted to focus a little bit today just on the whole food diets and how it's important for mental health. So we actually know that there's a number of psychological impacts that your diet has. And it's the gut-brain axis that we have heard about, but there's actually now a lot of evidence to suggest that there's, even bioactive and psychoactive compounds in foods really do cross the blood-brain barrier and are important in maintaining our mental health and resilience. And so we did this really nice review working with some nutritional experts and behavioral psychologists. And in particular, Felice Jacka, who's based in Australia, is kind of a pioneer in a new field called nutritional psychiatry. And this is quite interesting, where she can actually fix people's psychological issues or psychiatric conditions with just putting them on a whole foods diet. And this is a difficult thing to do because, as Suzanne mentioned, that long duration mission to Mars actually requires us to pre-populate food for that crew, probably a couple of years ahead of when they actually land. And that food has to stay fresh and palatable and full of nutrients, which can degrade with time and radiation, for up to a period of about 5 years. That's the goal. And that's difficult to do. Right now on the ISS, when we're supporting the crew, Rachel's team, as you heard from her earlier, is supporting the crew on the ISS. They provide a lot of fresh foods as part of the way to maintain health, both physical and mental. But that's going to be really difficult to do when we're going far away to Mars. And so, what are some of the things that we're thinking about as our job, to augment what NASA's doing and really thinking about that long-term vision? One of the projects that I wanted to highlight today that we had funded that was a high success is to try and develop the next generation of probiotics to really sort out and find the right strain of bacteria that would live normally in your gut and enable us to actually see a difference in our stress resilience. And so we actually put out a call for proposals, and a company called HoloBiome actually was successful in coming forward with a very interesting proposal. And what they basically did is develop a screening mechanism by which they looked at different strains of bacteria, and some of these strains of bacteria are actually bespoke in the sense that they were selected for specifically psychiatric and psychological effects. And what they did is they tested all these different types of bacteria, strains of bacteria, in a model, a stress model in a rat, Sprague-Dawley rats, essentially, where they induce stress. And in response to stress, the animals intook a lot more sugar. So that's not unlike me. Sometimes when I get overly stressed, I go hit the ice cream in my freezer. And so animals have a similar type of response. And what you can see here on the right hand side, the control has about an 85% percent preference for the sucrose. And when you actually stress them, it's actually there's an effect in the stressed animals. Whereas if you start to give like ketamine, for example, ketamine is a known psychoactive compound that's highly effective in mitigating depression, especially medication-resistant depression in humans. But it also works just as well as ketamine if you give this Holo-1, which is a bacterial strain that they selected for. So wouldn't it be great, instead of having to take a drug and having to bring along with you an entire, kit of medications, that you can actually provide a microbiome-based approach to taking care of some of the anxiety-inducing stressors of spaceflight. And I want to shift gears now to talk about a model, like Suzanne talked about all the different spaceflight analogs that the Human Research Program uses, including CHAPEA and HERA and some of the Antarctic stations that HRP has been working with. And why this is so important is because we have such few numbers of people to look at in space. We want to really study the ability to predict and also prevent some of the psychological concerns that we may have on a long duration mission. And so the Antarctic program is really quite an interesting model in the sense of there's extreme isolation. In particular, the Australian Antarctic program has absolute isolation for 9 months, unlike some of the other stations that really have the ability to evacuate folks if there is a concern. The stations are highly small. This means that it has a much higher fidelity for a Mars mission. They have 4 stations that are highly isolated, and the crews are less than 20 people, whereas some of the other stations, like the NSF stations the US uses and others, have much larger crews in the hundreds. And the other thing that's really attractive to us is at looking at this model is that it has a single physician model in each site. And so it's not unlike what you would imagine a long duration mission to Mars, where you have a single care provider, whether it be a crew medical officer that's medically trained or not, but with small crews. And what we love about this is the absolute extreme isolation, real operational environment where you could test real stressors, real ways to assess whether somebody's having issues, and real mitigation strategies, for example, like that strain of bacteria that I talked about previously. And the other thing that's really exciting is that they've actually noticed behavioral problems. So unlike many of the analogs that we have, used up to date. And Suzanne showed a fantastic database, including over 117 or even more individuals. Um, the crews that go into those simulated analogs, as well as the crews that go to space, are really highly selected. Whereas here, even though they're highly selected, they still see some behavioral health problems. And so this is a perfect place for us to be testing some of our behavioral health screening methods as well as our mitigation strategies. And so what we're doing in particular for mental health concerns is that we're comparing a test on the left that HRP has been using as part of their standard measures. As Suzanne talked about, it's one of the batteries that we use to assess cognition, and it includes 10 different tests. It looks at a whole bunch of different behavioral health concerns. But we're comparing it side by side with an unobtrusive eye tracking capability, which is made by a company called Harmonize, and these were selected through a competitive measures. And so this is a way for us to look for unobtrusive and compare it to, can we predict how a person is going to perform in a real stressful environment over a long duration, 9-month extreme isolation environment, and compare it to a test that has been tried and true and has hundreds and hundreds of data points that have been collected on astronauts and astronaut analog populations. Okay, now I want to switch gears, and I don't have many slides left, but I want to talk about what the future holds. And so on this past week, NASA has laid out its vision for creating a lunar village. And that's really exciting. We're going back to the moon, starting with our first launch next week, sending humans to orbit around the moon. And our good folks here that are hosting this, we are anticipating low Earth orbit stations that will replace the ISS, for example, Starlab. Now, what's interesting about this new future, and it's right around the corner, is that we're going to have mixed crews in space. We're not only going to have the highly selected NASA astronauts who have now moved into the private sector, so you can actually see Peggy Whitson here in her NASA garb, but is also in the center picture here. Peggy flew as a working for Axiom on the ISS mission, but leading a private crew now in her capacity as a career astronaut leading a private crew. But you have private individuals who are going to go up. And at some point, very soon, we will probably have military personnel, whether it be Space Force or others. So now you're going to have a mixed crew, some of which will be private people, scientists, people who are working for certain companies, people who are building the infrastructure, as well as career astronauts. And so we are thinking about the team dynamics of the future. How do we mitigate the frictions that will come from a mixed crew, where you have massive differences in culture and languages, in the type of training they got, how much training they got, their pre-existing conditions. Some people will be going up with pre-existing conditions. There are different mission objectives for these different crews, and there are going to be a lot of different biases. And so we're actually thinking about that now, and are going to be helping the agency consider everything that they need to do to go beyond just a complete NASA crew. Now it's a mixing of crews, and that creates its own challenges. So I only have a couple more slides. We just opened up our commercial astronaut database. We started to do this. What NASA's been doing for many years is collecting what it calls standard measures, which is a whole battery of things. And Suzanne actually showed you some of those that they use in analog environments, and a subset of the things that she showed you, they actually do on astronauts in space. And so what we did is we harmonized everything that NASA's doing in space to a set of unobtrusive, low burden tests that are equivalent or similar, and every single private astronaut was given the opportunity to enroll, and we had a fairly high enrollment rate. All the private individuals that have gone to space, we have about a 90% enrollment rate, particularly from all the orbital missions. And we just opened up this data set to the public, and so feel free to go and take a look at it and see if you want to propose to receive some of this data. And so just to show you here some of the differences between the commercial versus the NASA, the commercial, they're much shorter missions. They're less than 30 days. Right now, the NASA data sets are 6 to 12 months, but we probably will be going to shorter duration missions on Artemis. The commercial, most of them are a few days up to a couple of weeks, but all that data is there. And sometimes we could see the early phases of the changes that occur in spaceflight with this other data set that's much shorter. So this would be equivalent to what we have from the shuttle days back when NASA was flying shuttle. The available data is here, and I'm happy to share this slide deck. The organizers can provide this to people, but we also have all of this on our website with the data release. Okay, and then finally, I want to just put in a quick plug. We're looking for a chief scientific officer, so if you know anybody, please send them my way. And with that, I will stop. I promised to be on time, and I don't know how we are, but hopefully we caught up.
You did fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. DeNoville. And wow, that was an incredible amount that you went over different projects. I think we need to have you back at some point once again for a full hour-long session so we can get more details about all of the fantastic work that you and your colleagues are doing at Trish, because that was very interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have time for directed questions right now, but we will revisit with Dr. DeNoville at the end in the Q&A panel. Next up, we have Dr. Jacob Hyde from Warfighter Consulting, who's going to be sharing with us about virtual reality and extended reality as a behavioral health and performance platform for space missions. And we're so grateful to have Dr. Hyde with us today, because one of our goals with this workshop series is to intersect academic, government, and industry researchers and make sure that we are exploring topics in bioastronautics from all of those different perspectives. So Dr. Hyde is going to be sharing the industry perspective on some of these topics, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you so much, Abby. Can you see my slides in the view that we want to be in?
Yes, your slide deck looks perfect, and I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So, Abby, I appreciate you having me this morning, and I have sat with a lot of attention listening to the scientists who we've been hearing in the past hour and a half almost. And so I feel honored just to be asked to speak about the bit of work that I do in this space, because everybody you've heard from thus far has made tremendous impacts across the fields of psychology and spaceflight and isolated, confined, and extreme environments. And so I'm Dr. Jacob Hyde. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and operational psychologist, and I own and run Warfighter Consulting, which is a small boutique consulting firm that works primarily on isolated, confined, and extreme environment research in the virtual reality and extended reality spaces. So just briefly for disclosures here, the funding sources of my work that I'll be discussing today are United States federal government funding sources, in particular funding from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and that comes through the In the Moment program, and from the United States Space Force through the XR Cognitive Agility Program. And the things that I talk about today, the data that I share, and the examples of the work that I show are those that are mine and by my company, not necessarily the official policy or position of the Department of War or any part of the US government. So at Warfighter Consulting, we are a small boutique consulting firm made of psychologists and software and 3D developers. And we build extended reality and virtual reality tools that have high psychological fidelity, meaning the things that you see when you put on a headset make your body react the same way they might in a real circumstance if you were to be in that place or doing that thing in real life, or at least as close as you can possibly get to that. And we do that by understanding cognitive load, by understanding the things that really go into decision making and behavior and affect. And we utilize subject matter experts from whatever field that it is that we are creating a product for, so that they can get the most accurate research data possible or get the most accurate thing that they want from their particular simulation or training that they're trying to design. And we do this using, obviously, the most up-to-date and state-of-the-art software tools that we have, including ones that we've developed ourselves. So, brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to do a brief overview of immersive technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality. I'll briefly touch on psychological challenges of exploration missions, because they already have been covered by all of the speakers thus far, but I think that must be something we as psychologists and scientists do, is always want to give that problem up front. So I'll briefly touch on that. I'll talk about how VR is useful, could be useful, might even be being used now as part of a pre-flight assessment. And then we'll talk about some VR in terms of how it might help during the mission, and NASA might be working on this, it might not. But we can talk about what we're doing, and I'll show some pictures. I do have to give a plug, though, that all the astrophotography that you're seeing is done by me. And so this is something I do in my spare time, is take pictures of deep space, and have some patent pending methods of taking this astrophotography and embedding it inside of virtual reality. And in fact, the image that you see on the left here of a little, like, let's say, droid or person inside of virtual reality, this is a screenshot taken from within a virtual reality headset of something we created in VR, but that utilizes a real deep space picture that I took in 360 degrees. And so there's a lot of different ways to mix what happens in reality, in images and video from reality, into virtual worlds, and to take virtual worlds and mix them into real reality. And this kind of mixed reality approach really is the future. And if anybody's ever worn a VR headset or some AR glasses, you'll know that it's kind of it's a very interesting thing. And seeing really is believing. You can look at pictures like I'll show you, some of which look distorted because they're coming out of a three-dimensional environment, and putting this on a 2D screen is really hard to do. But seeing is believing when it comes to this technology. And once you put on some of this technology, it's neat. And so these images on the left show kind of a mixture of what VR can look like, where we can embed real space images into virtual reality, or we can just take, and like the image on the bottom left, we can take real GIS data from Earth, and we can create that inside of virtual reality. And so if anybody's ever used like Google Earth, you have that ability on your computer or tablet to kind of start up in space, and you can kind of pinch or zoom all the way down, to kind of ground level, at least where the resolution is still good. But like if you've ever, we've got a Google Earth inside of VR, which is really cool. Or in this case, we created an add-on to Google Earth that takes real three-dimensional GIS data and allows you to kind of go down into that environment. So briefly, virtual reality is a fully immersive 3D rendering that replaces the user's physical environment. So you're inside of a headset of some sort, and everything that you look around and see is virtualized. It can be really, really high resolution and can be really close to what reality looks like, but it's still virtual. This is in comparison to augmented reality, where we have, you are able to see real world data or real world things, and then you have some sort of virtual overlay on top of that. Think like you might be looking through glasses, you might be seeing a tree, and then there might be some sort of virtual label over top of that tree that says tree. Now, everybody's likely seen something related to augmented reality, but believe it or not, there's not been much basic research done on how to best present something in augmented reality. There's been a lot of VR research done, started by NASA over 40 years ago, but augmented reality is a growing area that everyone seems to be interested in, but not a lot of research done on how to even best present information overlaid on things in the real world. Mixed reality, again, is this interaction with things in the real world that might have virtual information overlaid upon it. And so your ability to touch things in the real world, or even touch virtual things that might be shown to you in a real world environment, sort of your mixed reality where things begin to be a little virtual, a little real, and there's interaction there. All of this is encompassed by one term, XR, or extended reality. So you see a lot of these things, you hear a lot of these things, but there are differences. The majority of what we're going to talk about today is virtual reality, because it can be a very, very helpful tool, and likely will be a very helpful tool in long duration exploration missions and spaceflight coming soon. So in creating things in virtual reality, we need to have what we call high psychological fidelity. When you put on this headset and you look around at whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a simulation of an EVA, or it's a guide on how to use a tool, or it's a video game that you might be playing, maybe for a cognitive assessment or just for fun, we need this fidelity to be as high as possible so that your body and your brain react as close as it might if this were really occurring. And so VR is really good for a lot of reasons, because we can standardize the things that you see, we can make them repeatable, it's fully immersive, we can gather really granular data all the way from eye tracking and pupillometry down to what it is that you're saying and how you're breathing. And virtual reality is in a relatively small form factor. So when we build things inside of virtual reality, in order to get high psychological fidelity, we really go in depth into the sound, the lighting, the vibration, the clutter that happens in your vision, details of the environment, and the narrative of whatever story it is that we're trying to tell, or training or simulation that we are trying to make. So we go and we take and actually record sound from a place. So we'll talk in a minute about something we've got going for DARPA, and one of our environments there is a jungle. And so we went to the Amazon rainforest, to deep in the jungle, and we got pictures and video and audio. And those are what we embed into the actual VR scene, so that we give you as real as possible of an experience. And we do all of this in order to elicit cognitive responses, behavioral responses, emotional and physiological responses as close as we can to the real thing. We can use a lot of these VR applications that are high in psychological fidelity, obviously, to simulate and rehearse various things that we might do on a mission, in order to visualize information that we might need to be able to see, to train up skills pre-flight or during flight, and even to help us make some decisions. Now, again, very briefly, there are psychological challenges of exploration missions, including pre-flight things like selecting the right crew, assessing their cognitive performance, but also their decision-making style, which hasn't been covered a lot, and we'll talk a bit more about that. There are lots of in-flight challenges, especially on exploration missions, when we're talking about now being gone from home in a very small capsule for over a year, and in an environment where if anything goes wrong, you die. Your teammates die. You do not come home. And so these things sound really cool: exploration, going to Mars, being the first to do something, learning about things we never have been able to learn about before in a different way. But we don't often talk about the fact that they are extremely dangerous. They are life or death. And if anything goes wrong, that's it. And so a lot of the work that I do for the Department of War and for DARPA is under these high stakes circumstances, because when we start to understand what we need to know about people or their decision-making style, we have to do that in circumstances where there's life or death context, because there is no playing around. These aren't games any longer. And so we want to use VR as a tool across the mission continuum, whether that be for the Department of War or for NASA, or even for any of these civilian crews, like Dr. DeNovio was talking about, where we're going to start having multiple different kinds of people to go into space. So we're going to use VR as a tool across the continuum, both from pre-flight, during flight, all the way to decision support tools. So mainly what we work on, what we think is very important in terms of pre-flight that you can use VR for, and this work was funded by the Space Force, is to look at people's ability to self-regulate, to maintain their physiological control, for people to be able to use their executive functioning skills as best as they can, and to be able to make decisions that are timely and adaptive. And these screenshots that you see over on the right are from a VR application that we made for the Space Force, particularly something like the image that you see in the middle. If anybody's ever heard of the Wechsler memory scales, this is a task that's sort of modeled after the Wechsler memory scales, but is in 3 dimensions and looks like a video game and plays like a video game. And so these kinds of more video game virtual looking things that don't seem like real world, that seem very computerized like this, have a lot of promise. And so we've got ways to make simulations that look like the real world, which we'll talk about in a second. We've got these that look really virtual for a reason, but there is a great usefulness for both of these things. So in talking about like pre-flight testing, some cognitive testing, we know that assessment batteries, like was discussed earlier, are typically not available for the public to understand or know what tests we use, why we use them, how we score them, what profiles we're typically looking for. But you might guess, or if you look into the ANAM, which has been discussed a few times, one of the basic things that's used across all these tests is the STROOP task, which has been around for a very long time, which looks at the congruence between words and colors. And so, for instance, if you look over on the left in the little white box, you might have to have a participant read the word green, but the word green is in red. And so that causes the brain some processing skills. Now, in virtual reality, we've created a task that's immersive that does the same thing, but in multiple layers. So what we ask participants to do is to put on these glasses. We have all these different shapes flying at them, and then they're given this little heads-up display at the very bottom that tells them a rule. And in this case, it tells them a rule that is either congruent or incongruent in a lot of different ways. And so there's 3 different layers of processing that has to occur. So in the top right-hand image, you see that you've got these shapes flying at you, and your instruction here would be to shoot the yellow solid triangles. You would not shoot anything else except for the yellow solid triangles. But if you notice, yellow is in green, and the whole instruction is in green. So we're getting at that congruent, incongruent layer of processing. And what we can do is we can vary timing, and we can vary the number of commands you're given at any one time, all the way up to 3. And we call this astronaut mode or fighter pilot mode, where you've got to deduce and follow 3 different sets of instructions that might be congruent or incongruent in some ways. And you have to do that simultaneously under a time burden. And this is extremely difficult. And while this looks really interesting on the screen, once you put it in a headset, it's fun for a second until it starts to get really real. And your brain starts to have to realize that there are multiple simultaneous rule sets that are occurring that I have to find out the congruence of, and I have to actually operate and perform on this. Very, very difficult to do, but also very fun, because this is a way that we can begin to gather data on people, but do so in a way that's more gamified, so that they can actually have some entertainment and some playtime, but we can passively gather some data that can help us, and we can add to all the rest of the data. I'm looking at the time, and so since I'm going to go a little bit quicker. So I'm not going to cover this slide in depth, but I want to talk really briefly about what makes it a difficult decision. In long-term exploration spaceflight, we're going to have a lot of difficult decisions that the crew is going to have to determine and make on their own, some of which we can forecast and practice for, others that we can't, because we can't imagine some of the things that could go wrong. And so we need to know how people are going to make decisions and how they're going to react in those circumstances. And so for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, we have a program called the In the Moment program, and we're looking at high stake situations, in this case, medical triage. And we use medical triage in small unit or mass casualty scenarios because there's no right answer to medical triage. When multiple people are laying on the ground and they have been hurt or injured, there is no right answer. Every doctor or decision maker who goes onto that scene and who actually performs and is going to treat and assess and categorize people is going to do it a little bit differently. So these are high stakes situations that require high stakes decision making with no ground truth under extreme pressure. There are going to be a lot of these situations that could be faced in long-term spaceflight. These are just brief screenshots from the DARPA In the Moment program from our VR simulator, where we actually have people go into the simulator, they put on this headset, they treat and assess casualties. We do this in a very highly realistic manner. In this case, we have, you see some images of some casualties in a desert scene and in a nuclear submarine. Some of the findings that we've had so far, we had a few papers published, a lot more in the pipeline. If you email me, I can send you the papers. We've had over 700 participants that are doctors and medics from the United States and United Kingdom militaries. And what we have found by putting them in our headset is that we can understand the ways they make decisions and how the environment impacts those decisions. So the DARPA In the Moment program is really aims to explore the extent to which people are likely to delegate to something that has the same decision-making attributes as they do. In this case, thinking about how people might delegate to a decision support tool that might be useful in a context where there is no ground truth. But you can imagine that if we are going to start saying that we are going to delegate life or death decisions or who gets treated and when to an AI tool, that causes a lot of head scratching and can bring up a lot of different issues for people. So we need to understand how people begin to trust AI tools so that we can delegate to them appropriately. We do this by putting people through these kinds of situations. And we have found that measurable decision-making attributes can predict triage behavior within virtual reality scenarios. The ways that decision-making attributes express themselves is conditional and depends on the structure of the task. We found that text-based assessments or answering questions about your decision-making style do capture attributes that we find and see actually occur in simulation. So briefly touch on during mission, there's some psychological countermeasures that VR could be super helpful with. Some of you might have used these things, some of you might not have, but the ones that we have come up with and we use that we have prototypes for and we think could be useful for crews on long-term spaceflight are things like 3D walking tours, where we have very high fidelity video of places on Earth where to provide an astronaut with a little bit of stress relief or downtime. Perhaps they want to explore some places on Earth or go on a walking tour. Or perhaps at various asynchronous times, we upload some events from their family or from other cultural things that might have happened where they are from, and so that they're able to experience those kinds of experiences as if they were really there while they're gone for a really long time. We might also have some naturalistic engagement that we can do in virtual reality. I like to bird, and a lot of people like to bird and go around the world looking for birds and exploring them. So perhaps we can take and record the bird feeders at a crew member's house and in their neighborhoods, and we upload that into VR for them so that they've got the ability to watch at various times of the year across various seasons the different birds that visit their bird feeder. Or we take them and we send them some experiences of people birding from other places in the world so that they can target and do activities like that. We also have created things like 3D puzzles that they can use in virtual reality, because puzzles and games are really great tools, as I mentioned, which you can collect data from passively to add to your other data. But really, astronauts need games. They need things to do. They need to just be normal people. They need to play and have fun things that they like to do. So giving them games that are fun, that allow them to bond with their family, bond with other crew members, or even build their own games that they can share with people back home, or have their kids build games for them that they can then play. All of these things are, I think, things that are necessary in virtual reality. Finally, creative and hobby spaces, giving people the ability to do things like paint and draw, or even to develop new hobbies as they're on these missions, because they're gone for a long time and people develop hobbies across their lifespan. And so maybe they find something new that they want to do. Just because of time, I'm going to skip through these, and I'll just say that VR really does meet the mission across the mission life cycle. VR helps us to measure self-regulation. It can help us measure executive functioning, and it can help us measure decision-making. We have actual real scientific data that shows that we've created. There are a lot of ways to utilize VR. We are really excited to try and help out any way that we can to create these tools, to create these games and these fun experiences as countermeasures. As a psychologist, I really care about people and about making sure that we keep our people healthy and safe as they do explore the universe. We can use these tools to understand how people actually decide and make decisions under pressure. We can use the tools to sustain people's well-being and to build decision support. So as we begin to understand people's decision-making styles, the ways they make decisions in various environments, we can take that information, we can feed it into algorithms that also learn and change with the crew across their mission cycle, so that they have decision support tools that help them and that are constantly modifying with them when they have to face very difficult decisions. That's it for me. I appreciate Abby and everybody at OSU and Starlab for inviting me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hyde. That was fantastic. And I appreciate you coming and sharing your experience and knowledge in how we can utilize virtual reality in a broad range of ways to support future space flights. So thank you very much. So we are now going to enter into our question and answer panel portion. So once again, if you have a question and you would like to ask it yourself, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand and then I'll unmute you and you can ask, but otherwise you can drop your questions in the chat and I can ask them on behalf of you. So I will go ahead and kick us off with a question that was put in the chat earlier during this session from Agnieszka Skocka, who is a PhD candidate from Poland and is interested in knowing more about privacy and underreporting of psychological issues by astronauts. So she says, I've read about instances of underreporting issues due to the fear of astronauts being taken off of the flight status or otherwise having negative consequences or outcomes, I suppose. So can anyone here speak to both the reality of that in current spaceflight, but also how that type of underreporting might impact psychological research in these environments?
I'm happy to take this one as working with astronauts. I feel like culturally in the aviation community in the past, there's been less reporting of issues, underreporting. I will say in the last 2 or 3 astronaut classes, we've made a deliberate effort to take away some of the stigma associated with that. So we build relationships with astronaut candidates from early on so that they could trust us, that we know that we're there to help them, rather it being like this very rigid up chit, down chit kind of no-go or go situation. So we would like to think that over time in their candidate period, as well as the relationships that we formed during the pre-flight period, that we would be able to have a real relationship with them to which they would be able to be honest with us in our conversations with them. We like to think that we select people for a very particular reason, so they all come pretty well resilient. And if there are some low-level, like subclinical issues, that this is something that they would find some agency to try to manage and take care of, as well as like recruit or help in order to like help them with what they need. I think at the end of the day, they're so mindful of their impact on crew members that they would want to be able to like help themselves and have us help them than to be a burden on the crew or to have some sort of negative outcome to their crew.
Abby, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and add to what Rachel just talked about. So we think about Mars and we think about the lag in communication. And so we are really working towards a paradigm where the crew is self-caring for themselves. And so there may or may not be psychological support available to them that is accessible, timely, all those things. So as we're thinking about a different paradigm and also a different group of people, right? Maybe on the moon, there'll be non-NASA astronauts also having issues. We want to equip people with capabilities that will track their own performance. So we're often like the worst judges of our capabilities. Like just anybody who's ever gone with some friends to have a drink, right? Like people think, oh, I'm fine to drive. And you know, it's usually other people that tell you, no, you're not okay to drive. And so we often don't notice. And so I think equipping them with tools that are tracking their normal state and not you're a little bit off. And so the unobtrusive, you know, eye tracking or the voice analysis or the gait or you know if you're actually walking or your typing speed or you know there's many other ways that we can actually start to assess your normal, what's your normal for you and what's a deviation. And we could flag it for you. We could flag it for you. We could flag it for your crew medical officer or your commander. You could set it up however you want. Some crews are very touchy about Big Brother watching type thing and, you know, don't be watching what I'm doing. And some crews are going to want to know, have that kind of biofeedback response, but then not just flag it for them or their commander, but also maybe have a buddy system, or, just like certain folks have relationships, like a crew member that could support you if you're a little bit off today or something like that. Or it's an AI tool that you could talk to. A lot of people use ChatGPT as a therapist. I don't believe that's a good idea, but it's effective for some people. And so there may be tools that you can provide. And in fact, the previous institute I was with, we funded a project called Virtual ISS, and it was developed by a group. Jay Bucky was out of Dartmouth. And so it's actually being used in the Australian AED right now clinically. It's being used clinically where you go through a conflict resolution type of, a decision tree, and it actually gives you some modules that will help you sort of deal with situations. And so we want to enable people to take care of themselves or their crew members.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was both Dr. Passmore and Dr. Denoviel. Those were really interesting responses. So thank you. There is another question in the chat that I think shares some similarity here, because it's considering how we kind of shift our decision making under different contexts, comparing low Earth orbit, close to Earth, to longer duration missions. So I will ask that one next on behalf of Dr. Aisha, who posted it. How are you redefining acceptable behavioral health risk thresholds for Artemis missions, given the reduced evacuation options available?
I guess I'll take this one.
Thank you, Dr. Passmore.
Sure. There are NASA medical standards that are very well documented. They haven't particularly changed from ISS missions. So if there are presence of psychiatric conditions, then that's a clear requirement that they aren't fit for flight.
Thank you. All right, so we do have a question from an audience member. Nikita, would you like to ask your question?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for organizing this. This has been fascinating. So considering our wonderful speakers are working with people in space or studying people in space, what I would like to ask you is what surprised you most about humans in space and studying them in your career, what you didn't expect, which came up. I'd love to hear that. Thank you.
Ooh, that's a good question. I want to hear that too.
I could take that one. For me, being a biologist, I'm a biologist. I find it really fascinating that humans adapt as well as we do. Even something as simple as, the skin on the feet of astronauts becomes really like a baby skin because they're not using their feet, right? They're ambulating using their hands. And so something as simple as that is just all the adaptations that occur. They become adapted for the zero-G environment and for the confined environment, the change in the vision even, right, with the fluid shifts. It's appropriate for the kind of environment they're in. And so what the difficulty comes in is when you're switching environments rapidly, right? So if you just went to space and stayed in space long term, we would probably have, a long-term adaptation, and we would adapt, and we would invest our bodily resources in things that we need and get rid of things that we don't need. Like we don't need bones in space, right? So it reminds me of that silly Gary Larson cartoon of the boneless chicken farm. I don't know if you remember that, but it's like as living organisms, we just adapt so well. So to me, that is the most amazing thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Denoviel. Would Dr. Passmore, Dr. Hyde, Dr. Bell, would either of you like to share what's been most surprising to you?
I don't know that this is surprising. I don't know if anything surprised me yet, but I agree with Dr. Donville that the adaptation is quite remarkable. And with it, though, actually makes the transition periods some of the hardest. So it's like we're so good at adapting that we adapt to microgravity. And then when we're landing, that makes it harder, right, to do landing tasks because you've adapted to what it is. So I do think that's an interesting part of it. this is my expertise is more in teams. I don't know that anything has surprised me there, except that maybe how much the system doesn't position the team best for success. So whether like how the crew is composed, or the fact that they can't train together, or that different agencies use different trainings, it's actually the systems that make teamwork as hard as the people in isolation. But the kind of just like the behavioral health finding is in that 110 people, in well-screened people, we've never seen even mild levels of depressive symptomology, not even a tiniest uptick. And I think that probably surprises me, that you can put people in isolation for over a year and they don't get a little more depressed. But now that I've seen that finding for about a year, I guess it doesn't surprise me anymore. But at the time I thought, that's amazing. You'd think that at least a couple people would, but it's really not. Depression is not really an issue of interest that we see in the data anyway.
That's so interesting. Do you think that that's because of the rigorous selection processes in place that, ensure that the people there are not predisposed, or why do you think that is?
So
Okay.
there's, Dorit was talking about Antarctic data. We have collected data in the Antarctic, and there's been some studies published, and some of those studies have looked at in areas where they've been better screened and then kind of have like a minimal or no psychiatric screening. And that's where you read about a lot of these Antarctic issues, is when there's no screening. And so it is true, like we have such a rigorous screening process, and astronauts tend to be selected a little later in life. So you just don't see a lot of these issues like you might in the future, because of the commercialization of space and the desire to fly. Very diverse people, which is wonderful. But it's a little different than the very homogenous population we get in some regards.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So we do have another question from the chat that is, are there any long-term neurocognitive changes observed after repeated missions as compared to singular missions? So I think that one might be most appropriately addressed by Dr. Passmore, who has the most experience directly with you're popular today, Dr. Passmore.
So we're talking about post-flight data collection on.
Yeah, I think the question is getting at, do you see differences in the response and well-being of astronauts who have flown multiple times versus those who are on their first flight experience?
I would say it depends on what missions they were on. So a shuttle flight was very different than ISS mission. So it's kind of cool for them to be on different vehicles, different mission parameters. So there's always something like new for them to learn about themselves and to experience how many EVAs or no EVAs that they had. So every astronaut can have just a very different experience. I just think kind of what some of the comments are in the chat about like your perception really dictates whether the degree to which you are having a good time or not a good time, and how well you think about your mission when you get back.
Thank you. We have another question in here in the chat that says, how are the effects of spaceflight in this context different for women than they are for men? This is from Violet. Or maybe they are not different. That could also be the case.
So I'm talking about anecdotally, from just kind of working with males and females, like I haven't noticed any gender differences, but I don't know if like the data, that the researchers have collected, if they like have something different.
I think there was, Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a study, we did the sex and gender studies like 10 years ago now. I think on cognition, there is a slight difference between the sexes, and some of the tests, it may have been like, and I can't remember the details, but there were some minor differences in terms of risk taking and fine like differentiation? Correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne. I'm remembering?
Yeah, I don't know that we see those differences in our like larger database now, but I would say like with certainly like personality and cognitive performance, all that, a lot of times it's normed by like age and gender. But in terms of do those differences matter for operational performance? You know, no. You know, they can all do fine. But I do think there are probably, Rachel, you can correct this if this isn't right. Like it's more like you know, going to the bathroom is a different experience, or like when a woman is on her period, you know, and choices she has to make around that with whether or not it's suppressed or she's like, so there's men and women are mostly genetically the same, but we are a little bit different. And so it's just knowing yourself and managing those differences rather than some like profound issue that we see across genders or something like that.
Good point.
Amazing. Thank you all. Okay, looks like we have a question from Isaac Gardner. Isaac, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I am highly interested in environmental psychology and just like a lot of influence from For All Mankind, which I'm sure most of you are either big fans of or maybe you hate it because it's too dissimilar from what you do. But I think about kind of like what that transition was like onto the moon base for Shackleton Crater. And so for especially for probably doctors Denovial and Hyde, and for any of the other presenters, you're also knowledgeable. So, but I was thinking about like the tin can minimalism that we see within the show, and knowing that like that lunar village is something that's kind of like on the precipice of happening. I'm kind of interested in what are maybe some of those like environmental psychology pieces to make it go from kind of like that survivability to like thrivability. So like, you know, circadian rhythm stuff, like biophilic stuff, like, you know, greenhouses and gardens, all those things. So I'm kind of wondering from you all, like, what does that transition from like survivability to thrivability look like for these crews that are working on the lunar village? And yeah, just what are some of maybe like the more like surprising or innocuous contributions that you think would translate into thrivability?
So there's actually a decent amount of work that's been done in this space, and it falls under a couple different categories. And one is that I think people once you know, you totally know, but until you know, sometimes people don't notice this. The lighting, there's quite a effect on lighting on both performance as well as your circadian entrainment and how well you sleep. And when we're no longer following the day-night cycles that we have on Earth, it's really important to get that lighting right, whether it's an austere environment in a habitat or on the ISS or on Mars. So that's a really like just fundamental environmental characteristic that's necessary. The second is crop production is something we've looked at and we've published on, and the behavioral health impacts of that, as well as just interacting with the plants. They do enjoy it. Plants are tricky or crops, because it's probably not a sustainable nutrition source in its current form for a lot of different reasons. And so, but there can be some individual differences around expectations with an enjoyment of plants being more central to that person or not. And then there's some stuff about habitability or layout. So for example, a communal eating space, as well as having separate places to work and live are helpful. And that we're really not doing that in things like Orion. I mean, if you want to call like this area your eating space, and like this area your living space, but point to the front, that's your living space. Point to the side, that's your, you know, so, but so I think we're going to push the envelope a little bit more on there. And it'll be interesting for habitats though. And some of that stuff is I would like to think it'll go back to kind of following those best principles. I think there's a lot of cool work that can be done. There's also been some work on like color. And we took that into account, for example, when we 3D printed Chapea habitat, the color of it. It was partly to reflect the Mars regolith, but then within the hues that were chosen, that was somewhat decided in part because of the possible impacts on behavioral health. So I think like there's space architecture, space furniture, like all the things that are like adjacent to this and fallen. I think it's a really cool space to explore, particularly if we're talking about habitats on the moon and, just being more desirable. And as you're saying, like thrive, not just survive. Can you survive in a box? Sure. Is it great? No. And interestingly enough, even though it survives, we are tying some of our behavioral health data. This will be some of what I'll be presenting at IWS to actual operational impacts. So it's not just that some of the stuff that boosts our mood is nice to have. It's that it actually affects mission performance. And so kind of as we continue, it's not particularly in the environment for that particular finding that I was just referencing, but this idea that, can we generate positive affect with a more pleasant environment is a wonderful place to explore.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bell. That was great. Isaac, we also did host a bioastronautics workshop, one of our previous sessions of this series that was specifically focused on development of habitats in space. And our speakers during that talked a bit about what Dr. Bell was just discussing and how we can put that into practice in the development and design of spaces in space to best support healthy and happy astronauts. So if that's of interest to you, please do shoot me an email and I can get you the recording of that session as well. All right, everyone, I do apologize, but we are at 3 p.m. So this is unfortunately the end of our time together. I know we didn't make it to all of the fantastic questions, but hopefully that means that there will be continued conversation in the future. And if we host another session, we will have the opportunity to dig deeper and dive back into some of these topics. To all of our speakers, thank you so much for joining us today, for your fantastic presentations and for sharing your insight with us into these topics. We appreciate it. For everyone who has joined us, thank you for the time you've spent with us today, and please do continue to communicate with each other and with us on these topics. I will also pitch, this is the 6th event in our bioastronautics workshop series, but we have one more event coming up in the series this year, which will happen on April 17th and will be focused on advancements in training in space. We will send out details about that to everyone who has registered and attended this event, so you will definitely hear about that, and hopefully we'll see many of you join us for that event as well. Once again, thank you to everyone. We appreciate your time, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.